Hello and welcome back to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's Brexit, with the British House of Commons leader Jacob Rees-Mogg saying Parliament will vote on early elections again on Monday. Prime Minister Boris Johnson wants to hold elections on October 15th, but he failed to win support from lawmakers on Wednesday. Jacob Rees-Mogg also said the Brexit delay bill would be given royal assent once it passes through the House of Lords. The House of Commons leader said all legislation needed to leave the European Union on October 31st is in place. But earlier, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he suffered a defeat in the House of Commons after MPs rejected his attempt to force an early election. Now, Johnson has already lost a key vote to opposition lawmakers seeking to block a no-deal Brexit. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Mr. Alex de Ruyter, who's a political analyst based in Birmingham in England. Alex, thank you for joining us here on Indus News. Now, I mean, look, House of Commons leader Jacob Rees-Mogg says Parliament will hold another vote next week on early elections, but you had Jeremy Corbyn saying that he wanted elections, but then they didn't vote for it. Will they be able to get it through next week now?
Well, that's a very good question. We here at the Centre for Brexit Studies in Birmingham City University have been following this assiduously. I still think there are doubts that he would be able to get it through, for the simple reason that if the Labor Party have any fears that Mr Johnson would seek to change a proposed election date once Parliament were to be dissolved, then I suspect they would rather see a request for an extension of Article 50 with the European Union agreed to by Brussels before undertaking to have any election, because if it was accepted by Brussels, then the UK would stay in the EU for the duration. Whereas at the moment, we have Mr Johnson's word that he would agree to keep an election on the 15th of October. Once Parliament is dissolved, of course, he could unilaterally, as Prime Minister, move that date and thereby still achieve leaving the EU by the 31st of October with no deal, if that were his intent.
Right, so it's been a day for Boris at the office, as his younger brother has just quit the government as well, citing national interest. Do you think his resignation is going to have an effect on Johnson's efforts to convince the opposition to call back the election polls for next week?
No, I don't think it will. I think that's a separate thing. I think the issue there is only with Joe Johnson being his brother, of course, citing obvious reasons about the family relationship, and Joe Johnson, of course, had very different views in that regard, as pertains to leaving with no deal. So you can see the personal tension there. No, I don't think that's going to have any real impact on Labor's stance. I think the impact on Labor's stance is solely in terms of Boris Johnson's stated intentions and what his motives may be or not. The key issue, I think, is will the Labor Party be satisfied that the no-deal scenario will have been avoided? And I come back to my point about I don't think they will be completely satisfied until not just having a bill to extend membership receive royal assent, but actually seeing Brussels respond and lock in an extension period so that there would be no opportunity for the Prime Minister to deviate on his stated purpose here.
Yeah, you're right. As Boris's brother was voted to stay in the EU, and Boris himself was obviously leading the campaign to leave the EU. Now, I got a final question for you, Alex. I mean, we touched upon the extension of Article 51 on your first answer. I want to talk about that again. Do you think there's a possibility of them extending the Brexit deadline again?
I think that is certainly possible, yes. The EU have always said that they would agree to extending the Brexit deadline if there was a material change in circumstances, and the premise of holding a general election would certainly qualify in that regard.
Alex, thank you very much for joining us here on Indus News. That was political analyst on Brexit, Mr. Alex de Ruyter, joining us from Birmingham. Now, staying with Brexit, EU Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier says the bloc will remain vigilant, united and calm in the Brexit situation. Britain's new negotiator David Frost was also in Brussels for talks with EU officials. After discussing the situation with EU ambassadors, Barnier met the EU Parliament's Brexit steering group. British and EU diplomats say there is no immediate prospect of negotiations on the withdrawal deal. Earlier, the EU said it sees no alternative to the Irish backstop in any Brexit agreement. European Commission spokesperson Mina Andrive said the backstop is the only solution to safeguard the Irish peace accord. Now, the Taliban have claimed responsibility for the killing of 20 foreign troops and Afghan security personnel in a blast in the capital, Kabul. In contrast, the Interior Ministry says only 10 people were killed and 42 others injured. NATO says 1 Romanian and 1 US soldier were among the killed. The explosion shook Shashi Tharoor, a heavily fortified area adjacent to Kabul's diplomatic green zone, which hosts many important complexes. Now, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has refused to sign a peace deal between Washington and the Taliban. The Afghan government says it's concerned by the peace deal and wants more clarification. Pompeo said he will be a signatory to the deal after all parties, including the United States President, sign it. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus said there is no agreement to sign yet. The Taliban-US deal pledges to withdraw around 5,500 American troops from Afghanistan in just 20 weeks. Now, Iran has announced it will end its limits on the development of uranium centrifuges after the US refused a sanctions waiver. This is the third step in the scaling back of the country's commitments to the 2015 nuclear deal. Meanwhile, the EU urged Iran to stay committed to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. In a televised address, President Hassan Rouhani said Tehran will continue negotiations to save the deal. Iran agreed under the 2015 multilateral deal to limit its nuclear program. Rouhani said Iran will negotiate with France as EU representatives in a 5-month framework. Earlier, the US blacklisted a shipping network it says is run by Iran's Revolutionary Guards. The US Treasury Department imposed sanctions on 16 entities, 10 people and 11 ships. The department has accused Iran's Quds force of selling millions of barrels of oil to benefit Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Mr. James Dorsey, who's a political analyst based in Singapore. Mr. Dorsey, thank you very much for joining us here on Indus News. So, how long do you think it will take for Iran to implement its decision to develop more centrifuges or develop the uranium enrichment program?
Well, I think that the Iranians are still going to take their time. They've given this whole process about 2 months, and they are negotiating a deal with Europe, particularly with the French, whereby the French would be paying them $15 billion, and that would be basically offset against oil shipments. So I think they will want to let that process ride out before they really move to a qualitatively next step.
Do you think the Iranian government has indicated any time that they may persuade it to reverse their deal from the nuclear pact? And also, in another development, Russian President Putin has suggested an alternative to the G7. What do you think of that, James?
Well, first of all, it's unlikely that the Russian proposal is going to be accepted, particularly by 6 of the 7 members of the G7. So it may be something that theoretically Trump, or one could imagine that President Trump would entertain. But if one looks at the response that he had in Biarritz at the last G7 in terms of proposing to reinvite Russia into the G7, that was a very negative response, and I don't see why the majority of members of the G7 would respond any differently to President Putin's proposal.
Thank you, James, for your input. That was Mr. James Dorsey, an analyst in Singapore. Now, the United States has offered millions of dollars to an Indian captain of an Iranian oil tanker suspected of heading to Syria. State Department official Brian Hook says the money was offered to convince the vessel's captain to steer it to a country where it could be seized. The State Department said the US has contacted several ship captains, warning them of consequences for supporting terrorist organizations. Reacting to the news, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said having failed at piracy, the US has resorted to outright blackmail. Hitting back, Washington accused Zarif of blackmail with his call for $15 billion from the EU signatories for Iran's future oil sales. Now, a top US official says Washington is holding talks with Houthi rebels in a bid to end the war in Yemen. This marks the first contact between the administration of President Donald Trump and the Houthis in over 4 years. More in this report.
A 2015 Houthi offensive against the Yemeni government triggered the launch of a Saudi-led military intervention against the rebels. But the conflict has since become more complex. Speaking to reporters in Saudi Arabia, the U.S. Assistant Secretary David Senker says the talks are aimed at finding a negotiated solution to the conflict.
We are narrowly focused on trying to end the war in Yemen. We are working with Martin Griffiths. We are in close contact with our Saudi partners, and we are also having talks to the extent possible with the Houthis to try and find a mutually acceptable negotiated solution to the conflict.
Tens of thousands of people have been killed since the rebels captured the capital city of Sana'a and much of the country in 2014. The United Nations describes the situation in Yemen as the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
Now, Pakistan's envoy Tamima Janjua has briefed UNHCR High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet about human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. Briefing members of the Council, Janjua highlighted the humanitarian emergency in occupied Kashmir after India's illegal annexation of the valley. Meanwhile, High Commissioner Nafis Zakaria held a closed meeting in London with a large number of UK parliamentarians. The parliamentarians agreed to continue working for the alleviation of suffering faced by Kashmiris because of New Delhi's lockdown. Lawmakers acknowledge Kashmir is an internationally recognized dispute and awaits implementation of relevant UNSC resolutions. India's curfew and communication blackout in the valley has entered its 32nd day. Well, I'll be back with more news and stories from around the world after this short break. Don't go anywhere. Hello and welcome back. We're going to go live to Boris Johnson now, who's speaking about the Irish backstop. Let's listen in and see what he has to say.
Police in our country have a unique relationship with the public. It's quite unlike what you find in many other countries around the world. And I'm immensely proud of the way we do it and of our record in bringing crime down. And we want to go on, as I say, to recruit another 20,000 officers in this country. And I hope you think that that is the right thing to do. And yes, of course, I understand that crime is changing and crime is now a lot more online. But I think people in this country want to see police officers out on the streets, spreading that sense of reassurance, making sure that everyone in their neighbourhood feels safe and looked after. And we are going to insist on that. And this first push will cost, as Sajid Javid announced yesterday, £750 million for the first wave. There will be more.
Well, that was Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking in Northern Ireland with regards to the Irish backstop and keeping the streets safe of United Kingdom. Now back to our bulletin, where Amnesty International has launched a global campaign against India's communication blackout in Indian-occupied Kashmir. The body says the draconian communication blackout in the Indian-occupied valley is an outrageous assault on Kashmiri's civil liberties. The body's head in India, Akar Patel, said the blackout is now a month old and cannot be prolonged by India any further. He said the clampdown has impacted the emotional, mental and physical well-being of the local people there. The Let's Kashmir Speak campaign will highlight the ongoing communication blackout and has gone viral. Indian Congress leader Shashi Tharoor has criticised his own government, saying the Kashmir crisis is a travesty of Indian democracy. Speaking in Delhi, Tharoor said the ruling party stripped the autonomy without Kashmiri's consent. Tharoor said the BJP government just sought the consent of the Kashmir governor, who is New Delhi's appointee. Meanwhile, India's Supreme Court will hear a petition filed against the arrest of a leftist political leader in occupied Kashmir. On his return from Srinagar, Sitaram Yeshuri was arrested after he said New Delhi was lying about the situation in the valley. In the meantime, Indian occupation forces abducted over a dozen people in a village in southern Kashmir. Local media reports the civilians were picked up in a midnight raid and tortured for over an hour. South Africa has closed its embassy in Nigeria following reprisal attacks by the locals. South African-owned businesses were being targeted by the anti-migrant protesters in several Nigerian cities. Africa's foreign ministry confirmed that the diplomatic missions in the Nigerian cities of Lagos and Abuja have stopped working since Wednesday. In response, Nigeria announced plans to evacuate its nationals from South Africa. Nigeria's foreign ministry said a commercial airline will evacuate nationals willing to return on Friday. The ministry said it will recall its envoy from South Africa. Russia has proposed a new G7-style forum featuring Turkey, India and China. President Vladimir Putin announced the idea at the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. The Russian president also announced his country would resume the production of missiles banned under the INF Treaty. He said Moscow will not deploy missiles unless the United States does so first. Putin has also expressed concern over the US plan of deploying missiles in Japan and South Korea. Moscow says the EU's extension of sanctions against Russia is devastating and destructive for the bloc itself. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova says the curbs are damaging for a post-Brexit Europe. Zakharova said the bloc chose to extend the sanctions despite pressure from Washington. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also called out the EU for extending sanctions against the country. In the meantime, Lavrov said the US withdrawal from the INF Treaty has shaded the future of the New START Pact. He said Moscow and the US are more responsible for global security than other countries. The United States and China have agreed to resume negotiations in mid-October to end their trade war. The U.S. Treasury Department says Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin spoke with Chinese Vice Premier Liu over the phone. China's central bank governor Yi Gang also took part. China's Commerce Ministry says the ministerial-level talks will be held in Washington. It says trade teams from the two countries will also hold consultations in September before the October talks. Turkey says it will start allowing 1 million Syrian refugees to enter Europe if Ankara doesn't get more international support. Under a 2016 deal with the EU, Ankara agreed to stem the flow of migrants to Europe in return for aid. But the number of migrant arrivals in neighboring Greece increased last month. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey has spent $40 billion on Syrian refugees. He criticized the EU for failing to live up to its promises. Turkey is home to over 3.6 million Syrian refugees. A Ukrainian court granted bail to a suspect in the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight in 2014 that killed 298 people. Volodymyr Tesmak has an alleged former commander of Russian-backed separatist forces in eastern Ukraine. He is one of the people who could be handed over to Russia in an expected prisoner swap. But European lawmakers asked Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky not to allow Chemak to travel to Russia. The MH17 jet was traveling from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur when it was hit by a missile over eastern Ukraine. Italy's new pro-European cabinet has been sworn in by President Sergio Mattarella. The list of 21 new cabinet ministers for Giuseppe Conte's second stint as Prime Minister was approved by Mattarella yesterday. 10 ministers are from the Five Star Movement, while 9 are from the centre-left Democratic Party. PD's leader Luigi Di Maio was named as Foreign Minister. The post of Economy Minister went to the PD's Roberto Gualtieri. The key position of Interior Minister was handed to a technocrat who is not affiliated with any party. Conte hopes the new cabinet will help build a better Italy and improve ties with the EU. Now, Jakarta is one of the fastest sinking cities on Earth, with environmentalists warning it could be underwater by the year 2050. Indonesia is now looking to move its capital to the province of East Kalimantan. The area is known for its forests, which are home to numerous endangered animals, most notably orangutans. More in this report.
Orangutans are the only species of great ape native to Asia. There are now under 120,000 left in the wild. Already endangered because of deforestation, hunting and the illegal wildlife trade, they now face a new threat. Conservationists warn if Indonesia builds a new capital in East Kalimantan, it could mean the end for the orangutans.
We need some disclosure of information or data on the relocation so that we can make an effort to mitigate potential damage and do what can be done in our efforts to conserve the orangutans. There will be challenges, as this place will be accessed by many people in the future.
Indonesia is notorious for failing to keep city development under control. In fact, that is one of the reasons its current capital is sinking. But the head of Indonesia's Development Planning Agency says there is nothing to worry about.
We will not build the new capital in protected forest area. Yesterday, the president announced the Suharto Hill and Conservation Area will enter the development area, but this will still be maintained as conservation forest.
Orangutans play a vital role in dispersing seeds through their habitat, and reduction in their population could bring about the end of Indonesia's forests.
Now, Europe might look like a modern beacon for women's rights at first glance, but this can be misleading, especially in France, where 121 women were killed as a result of domestic violence last year. The government is now trying to make France a safer country for women. More in this report. Violence against women is a major problem the world over. This includes France, where over 100 women have been murdered by their partners in 2019.
Every day I'm crying for her one more time, and I would like to change that. She filed a complaint 5 or 6 times. I have filed a murder complaint myself 5 or 6 times. We had been listened to. This is true and false. We didn't know why, how. We were warned 3 days before her death that all the complaints have been dismissed. I don't understand why.
The government is looking to rectify the situation by investing in shelters for women with violent partners.
Women who stay with a violent partner are resigned to it, mostly due to the lack of financial and material means to leave with their children. We are going to put on the table 5 million euros to create 1,000 new emergency accommodations.
NGOs and women's rights organizations say this will not be enough. They've called for a more ambitious plan with a budget of over 500 million euros. Sensing the gravity of the situation, President Emmanuel Macron said France has not known how to protect women from deadly violence. Now, the death toll from Hurricane Dorian has climbed to 20 in the Abaco Islands in the northern Bahamas. Meanwhile, the slow-moving storm has returned to a Category 2 status as it heads for the United States capital of South Carolina. Bahamas Prime Minister Hubert Minnis has warned the death toll could rise. Minnis says the storm is one of the greatest national crises in Bahamas history. The National Hurricane Center says Dorian had wind speeds of 185 kilometers per hour. The devastating gusts made it a Category 3 storm on the 5-level scale. US President Donald Trump said the damage could have been worse if the storm had stayed on its original track.
We got lucky in Florida, very, very lucky indeed. We had actually, our original chart was that it was going to be hitting Florida directly. Maybe I could just see that, Kevin. it was going to be hitting directly, and that would have affected a lot of other states. But that was the original chart.
Now, the number of measles cases in New Zealand have reached 1,000 in 2019. Medics say people could die if the disease continues to spread. The Ministry of Health says a total of 1,051 cases have been registered in 9 months. The outbreak is largely concentrated around Auckland with 877 confirmed cases. Measles targets children in particular, causing disability or even death. The World Health Organization say the growing number of cases in developed countries with high vaccination rates is alarming.
The reason is that even in a national setting, where coverage is very high at the national level, there can be small pockets, communities of people where the vaccination coverage in that particular community is low and insufficient to prevent an outbreak.
The US State Department has issued a travel warning to its citizens because of the outbreak in New Zealand. Now, a district judge in Virginia has ruled the US terrorist watch list violates the constitutional rights of individuals. The FBI list includes 4,600 Americans among over 1 million people as of June 27. District Judge Anthony Trenger has asked for additional legal briefs before deciding what remedy to impose. In his 31-page ruling, the Virginia judge wrote the case presents unsettled issues. The ruling grants summary judgment to nearly 24 Muslims who had challenged the list. In a statement, the Council on American-Islamic Relations described the decision as a victory. The plaintiffs say the process for adding names is overly broad and riddled with errors. The FBI's terrorist screening database is shared with various US departments and foreign governments. Facebook has listed over 400 million phone numbers online in its latest privacy lapse. An exposed server stored 419 million records on users across several databases, including 133 million US accounts. Facebook has confirmed parts of the report but downplayed the extent of the exposure. It said the number of accounts so far confirmed was around half of the reported 400 million. The social media giant says many of the entries were duplicates and that the data was old. Following the 2018 Cambridge Analytica scandal, the company disabled a feature allowing users to search the platform by phone numbers. In Bangladesh, Rohingya refugees say they're concerned by the suspension of mobile phone services in refugee camps near the Cox's Bazar. The government suspended mobile data for the 1 million Rohingyas living in the camps because of security concerns. More in this report.
Tensions have been running high in the Rohingya sites since last week, when a local leader of Bangladesh's ruling party was allegedly killed by refugees. Later, at least 4 Rohingya were shot dead by police. The Telecom Regulatory Authority ordered mobile phone operators to block data services to those areas. Voicing his anger, Rohingya shopkeeper Habibullah says refugees have lost a vital connection to the outside world.
If mobile phones are disconnected, it will be a big problem for us. We will not be able to talk with our relatives, and we have relatives in other countries. I have brothers living in Saudi Arabia and Dubai. If we cannot call them, how will we get news about our relatives?
More than 40 non-governmental organizations working with Rohingya refugees have also been ordered to end operations.
In the Nigerian city of Lagos, children from slums have taken to playing chess. For them, it isn't about losing or winning, it's about laughter, filled streets, and a respite from the harsh realities of poverty. More in this report.
Chess, a board game famous for its reliance on strategy, has a tiny but avid following in Nigeria. Crowds of children bustle around chessboards in the neighborhoods of Lagos, figuring out their next move as part of a community project. Dozens of matches are played simultaneously as participants master a game often considered out of reach of the masses. The club's goal is to provide a space to play and learn the game for many who are not in school and work to support their families.
They're learning soft skills from playing chess, skills like critical thinking, like good communication skills, creativity. They're learning how to think strategically. They're learning problem-solving skills, and these skills are skills that will be relevant throughout their existence.
Held beneath a makeshift tent in the courtyard of a local bar, in less than a year, the program has already drawn an enthusiastic following. The club already boasts several success stories. The attention the project has generated has helped shine a spotlight on more marginalized children.
Make me to think fast, to understand something quickly.
Videos of the budding chess masters shared on Instagram show these children are like any other anywhere in the world. According to the FIDE World Chess Federation rating, the West African nation ranks 88 out of 186 countries.
Small islands and coastal cities in the Asia-Pacific need more funds to assist vulnerable communities against rising sea level. That's what climate experts are saying, and they're also saying residents need to decide whether to relocate or stay. More in this report.
More than 20 million people are uprooted every year by floods, storms, landslides and other extreme weather conditions. According to International Federation of the Red Cross, the vast majority of people forced from their homes live in the Asia-Pacific region. Climate researchers are urging the world's cities to invest to adapt where possible. Last month, Indonesia said it would relocate its capital from the sinking city of Jakarta.
The city is basically, there will be growth management so that the city does not develop wildly out of control. We do not limit people, the growth management. Meaning, for example, what makes Jakarta excessive is because all activities just come in. And the more activity, the more people come. So we don't block the people from coming in.
Meanwhile, Fiji plans to move dozens of coastal villages inland. The Marshall Islands is also building seawalls to protect coastal communities. Even wealthy, the city-state Singapore faces serious threats. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong says protecting the lower-lying island could cost $72 billion or more in the coming decades.
Now, a Chinese firm called Sinogene has given a British short-haired cat its 10th life. Garlic is the Beijing-based company's first successfully genetically modified cat. More in this report.
China has a growing pet market and a huge appetite amongst their owners for spending. According to a report, pet-related spending reached $23.7 billion in 2018. Experts at Pet Fair Asia think the market for pet cloning in Asia is also setting to skyrocket. 7 months after Huang Yu's pet cat Garlic died, the short hair was cloned by Chinese firm Sinogene.
I'm so excited to see Garlic after such a long time. I don't know how to describe the feeling.
The company has cloned more than 40 pet dogs. The procedure costs a hefty $53,000, while the price for a cat comes in at $35,000. Despite the high price tag, not all clients are high earners.
Many customers are young people who have just graduated. They choose to clone their pets and bear the financial burden. It does not have a strong relationship with the income level.
Wang hopes the personality of the new Garlic is as similar to his old white and gray cat as is his appearance.
The similarity of personality between cloned pets and original ones are better than their appearance because the formation of personality is largely related to genetics. The personality may change a little with external factors like environment, but there are still many similarities.
The country's scientists have high ambitions for their coming cloning challenge. They're working on the theory that if cats can be cloned, so can pandas.
Baby turtles have appeared unexpectedly on an Ecuadorian beach. It's the first time it's known to happen in the seaside town of Same. More in this report.
Olive ridley turtles found in the Americas and Asia are listed in the US Endangered Species Act. After 25 years, they returned to the beach where they were born to breed again. But some 11,000 olive ridley turtles were born in Same's Esmeraldas last year. This move to new breeding grounds indicates the harm human actions pose of traditional spawning.
It's extraordinary since Same Beach did not show turtle nesting records. We understand that it can be because of the amount of light and infrastructure that exists in the common spawning beaches. In front of the Same Beach, where the new spawns have taken place, it is a private enclosure and it's not lit all the time.
The low-lit beach of Same, surrounded by holiday homes, suited the olive ridley turtle better for the nesting. Females dig a pit and lay more than 100 eggs that hatch together at night around 50 days later.
We have seen everything. We have seen merchants taking the turtles and selling them in glasses of water. We have seen tourists who, when trying to help them, their bone structure is still very fragile. They dig to help them but break their limbs, things like that. It is also very important to emphasize that the process of finding the ocean is fundamental to the nature of the species, and people disorient the species by trying to bring them closer to the shore.
The local government has cordoned off the areas of the Same beach where the sea turtles were sighted. Authorities have made new laws to punish people caught stealing the young turtles that are an endangered species.
Well, I'll be back with the stories of business and sports after this short break. Now, in business, global stocks have risen over optimism of resumption of trade talks between the US and China. China's stocks ended higher, boosted by hopes of Beijing freeing up the amount of cash banks must keep as reserves to shore up the economy. European stocks hit one-month high, with the Pan-European Stock 600 index rising over 0.5%. France's CAC 40 index jumped close to 1%. To hit a month more than 1 month high. Germany's DAX 2 rose 0.85%, while London's FTSE 100 traded roughly flat. Australia's ASX 200 gained 1% on trade optimism. Well, it's 30 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore. But before I go, they say 18th birthdays are very important, and it's my niece Saliha's 18th birthday. So happy birthday, Saliha. Bye-bye.